Lesson 12 Render and Commit. 1. Introduction. Before any component in a React application appears on screen, React must go through a process known as rendering. Understanding this process helps us predict how and when our code executes, and why certain visual updates happen. Think of your components as cooks in a kitchen, each preparing a dish, while React acts as the waiter, taking orders from users and delivering the final dishes to their tables. In this analogy, React's rendering process can be divided into 3 main stages. Triggering a render, like delivering a guest's order to the kitchen. Rendering the component, like preparing the order in the kitchen. Committing to the DOM, like placing the order on the table for the guest. 2. Step 1. Trigger a render. There are 2 main reasons React decides to render a component. When the component is being displayed for the first time, the initial render. When the component's state, or the state of one of its ancestors, changes. During the initial render, React starts the application by creating the root and telling it to render a component into a specific place in the DOM. This is essentially React's first step in bringing the kitchen to life. After this, further renders happen automatically whenever state changes. Updating a component's state triggers React to re-render that component and everything it depends on. You can imagine this as a restaurant guest changing their mind, ordering dessert or asking for a different drink. React goes back to the kitchen to prepare and deliver the updated order. 3. Step 2. React renders your components. Once a render is triggered, React starts calling your components to determine what should appear on screen. Rendering is the process of React invoking each component function and interpreting what UI elements they describe. On the first render, React calls the root component, the one at the top of the component tree. For later renders, React calls whichever component's state has changed. If that component returns other components, React continues calling those 2, step by step, until the entire tree of components has been processed. This process continues until React has a complete picture of what the interface should look like. During the initial render, React creates the necessary DOM elements. During a re-render, it checks for differences, noting what has changed, but doesn't yet update the screen. That happens in the next step. An important rule applies here. Rendering must always be a pure process. This means that given the same inputs, a component should always return the same result. A component should not modify any external variables or objects while rendering. In our restaurant analogy, every cook should focus on their own order, not on someone else's plate. If a component changes external data during rendering, it may cause unpredictable bugs. In development mode, React can help you catch these issues through a feature called strict mode, which intentionally calls your component functions twice to detect impure behaviors. 4. Step 3. React commits changes to the DOM. After React finishes rendering, that is, after it knows exactly what the UI should look like, it moves on to the commit phase. This is when React actually updates the visible screen. On the initial render, React places all the created DOM elements on screen using standard browser APIs. During subsequent renders, React compares the new render output with the previous one and applies only the minimal necessary changes to the DOM. For example, if a component re-renders because of an updated property or state, React checks whether any part of its output has changed. If a certain element remains the same, such as a text input field, React won't touch it. This is why you can type in an input box and see your text persist even while other parts of the screen update. React only changes what is necessary, keeping everything else intact. 5. Epilogue. Browser paint. After React commits the updates to the DOM, the browser takes over to paint the changes on screen. Although this phase is technically part of the browser's rendering process, within React's documentation we usually refer to it as painting to avoid confusion. It's the moment when the visual updates you requested finally become visible to the user. 6. Recap. Every visible update in a React application follows the same three-step pattern. Trigger, caused by an initial render or a state change. Render, React determines what the new UI should look like. Commit, React applies the necessary changes to the DOM. React's efficiency comes from performing only the essential work at each step. It avoids unnecessary updates and encourages developers to write pure, predictable components. In development, enabling strict mode helps ensure components behave correctly and remain consistent over time.